All right, guys, we're going to have a very quick lesson on survivorship curves. And I just thought this picture was pretty funny because how often do you see a picture? This is from a biology textbook that says just die randomly. It's going to make sense by the time we get through with this lesson. So, what is a survivorship curve? Well, it's a graph that displays for a cohort in a population how many of them will survive to a certain stage of life. And this goes all the way through to the maximum lifespan. And if you're wondering what is a cohort, it's a group of individuals of the same age. So, you would theoretically pick, say, 100 individuals or 1,000 individuals who were all born or reproduced or sprouted in the case of plants at the same time, and you would track them throughout their life to see how many of them survive. When you get that, you will get one of three types of curves. We're going to go over these in a moment, so you'll see graphs of these and figure out what they mean and be able to kind of identify some pictures to go with the terms that we're learning here. So a type 1 survivorship curve is also called a late loss curve. A type 2 survivorship curve experiences constant loss. So at every point in an organism's lifespan, you've basically got an equal chance of dying. And a type 3 survivorship curve represents early loss. Most of these individuals will die off before they reach maturity. So let's look at a sample population of 100 trees. And we're going to look at four different lifespans: seed, seedling, young tree, and adult tree. So let's focus on, we're going to look at 100 of these pine cones. These are the seed stage, and since we're tracking them from, this is essentially like the birth of a tree, there are 100 of out of 100 of these still alive. Now, out of these 100, a lot of them are not going to find a place to kind of root and germinate. And so very few of them will make them to the next stage of life, which is seedling. So at this stage, if you sat and counted, there are 12 out of 100 of these who are still alive. Now, seedlings are vulnerable to environmental factors. They could get eaten, they could end up in a natural disaster. And so, out of these 12 seedlings, which keep in mind are still us tracking from those 100 pine cones, only five of them survive to young tree stage. And then for adult, maybe one got cut down by a beaver, or one ended up getting struck by lightning or succumbed to disease. And out of those five, now four are still alive. If we graph this, what we'll see is we have 100 of these guys at seed, we have 12 of these guys at seedling, 5 at young tree, and 4 at adult tree. And if we connect these lines, we'll see this curve. This is an early loss curve because very early in the lifespan, most of the organisms die off. How is this different from the other curves? Well, a type 1 curve is something that, for example, you would see in humans. Humans tend to have late loss, meaning it's late in our lifespan that we tend to start seeing organisms die off. These are usually case strategists that are going to do this because they have very few offspring and they're going to make sure they care for them until they survive to maturity. Types 2 are going to have more of an intermediate type of reproduction strategy. They're not quite case strategists or are strategists, but if you remember from our previous lesson, it's not actually very realistic to find a pure case strategist or pure R strategist in nature. Most organisms tend to exist upon a continuum between R and K strategists. These guys experience constant loss, so you have an equal chance of dying whether you're a young organism. In general, we tend to use songbirds as the example for this, or whether you're an older organism. And there are also some annual plants, some lizards, and some small mammals that also follow this type of survivorship curve. And then type 3 is like we looked at with the trees. These tend to be R strategists, but remember, not all organisms are pure K or pure R strategists. We talked about how trees can be kind of iffy, where they have some characteristics of both types of selected species. Most of these organisms will die off early in the lifespan. So out of a given number of seedlings, you You may have seen lots of acorns on the ground, for example. Most of those acorns are not going to make it to fertile soil where they'll be undisturbed and uneaten by things. And so a tree may have, 10 million acorns that it releases, and very few of those will survive to seedling. But once they reach maturity, once they reach a certain point in their lifespan, let's say around here, they're pretty have a pretty high chance of surviving until the end of the lifespan. For a tree, keep in mind this lifespan could be up to like 200 years, depending on the species of tree. For a human, this maximum lifespan could be, let's say, 90 years or 100 years. And for these birds, it could be 2 to 3 years. It depends on the organism that you're looking at, how long this maximum life expectancy is. But what we're looking at is how far into this life expectancy each of these organisms will survive. So how is this related to R and K strategists? We talked about that some on the previous slide. Case strategists tend to typically follow something like a type 1 or a type 2 curve, while R strategists tend to follow a type 3 curve. But like I said, nothing's 100% definitive. So, you might find some R strategists who could follow more of a type 2 curve. I wouldn't say they follow a type 1 curve just because they tend to have a lot of offspring. That's one of the big characteristics of our strategists. All right, there was your super short set of notes. I hope you enjoyed the brevity.